So I guess I feel obligated to say some things about the alphabet, and I want to really stress and try to get this as maybe as clear as I can why I think that the alphabet was one of the most significant inventions in Western thought, certainly in what we would call the predecessor to science, to universal translation, to a kind of cultural cosmopolitanism. I mean, there's so many things that we could trace to alphabetacy. Now, some people have said to me that the alphabet was basically just taken from the Phoenicians and the Greek added vowels. Well, I think we all know that story, but that story is really not true. A, a better way to say it is to say that Greece was a seaport, and there were many different languages that were coming together there in Greece, and there were different forms of writing, both you know certainly there were ideographs and logographs and pictographs and things like hieroglyphics and even rebuses where you would have part of it be a picture and then some of it would be an image that is related to sound. But when you move to fully consonantal or syllabic script, okay, that's, we're starting to get there where the syllable is the smallest unit of sound that can be referred to by the little figure, by the image. But even here, this is something very different than the alphabet as a principle. I mean, the alphabet as a principle is an atomic subsyllabic element, right? I mean, the Greeks didn't take the Phoenician consonantal and add vowels. What the Greeks did is they discovered the pure consonant. And once that discovery was made, you never needed to discover the alphabet again. It's a principle and it spread. I think there's different ways to say that. I'm not sure the name of the movie. Maybe it was Dances with Wolves or something like this. It was a popular movie a while back that had like some Native Americans, and it was interesting. This one person says there is a person meeting with a Native tribe, and the tribe says, "Well, we have no writing." And then the guy says, "Well, why don't you tell this person over there something that only you know and no one else would know?" And the guy tells him some secret. And then this guy writes it down and he passes it to this guy, and the guy reads aloud what was written down. And they thought it was just absolute, like devil work. And he says, "Yeah, well, you don't need to have your own form of writing, right? When you have logographic writing or ideographic writing or pictographic, I mean, pictographic arguably could be figured out, but writing that was prior to alphabetic writing largely served mnemonic functions. It aided in memory and it helped serve a people from within that people. The alphabet was not only the condition for universal translation, but it changed the meaning of writing. It was no longer ultimately for memory. I mean, it liberated memory into creating novel utterances. And for people who have never heard, I mean, anything said could be written, right? It's a kind of a principle. I think another way to think about literacy and the importance of literacy for science, and this is why I guess I'm skeptical of people who want to talk about humans in terms of intelligence. See, I think this intelligence thing gets bandied around a little too often for my taste. I don't think that humans are the most intelligent of creatures. I think we're the most plastic, and the the discovery of the alphabet, which was a kind of a system of writing that then acted back upon speech. I think speech is an organic process. Writing perhaps is a tool, but once we learn to write, speech becomes literate and it acts back upon it. It has a profound effect on it. It's hard to really convey to people what what print in particular, I mean, it's certainly the alphabet and the alphabetic principle of seriality, linearity, uniformity, of left to right. There's all kinds of ordering processes that are noetic. There's structure, the way that our minds and our thought patterns are organized and the way that we access and retrieve information, things like that. I think, you know, the way to get at it is to ask, some of this, the way to really get at it is to ask Europeans what they think of the U.S. when they come to the U.S., and then to ask U.S. citizens what they think of Europe when they go to Europe. I think those questions really reveal much about the alphabet, as crazy as that probably sounds. But the alphabet and its order really structured the U.S. in a way that was, Europe was so pre printing press, pre automobile. It's wiggly and it's. I think for U.S. people when they go to Europe, it's sort of dingier or dirtier than they had imagined. Europeans come over and the U.S. is a lot more plastic and chintzy, flim flam than they imagined. The Europe is more serpentine and it's irregular. It has squiggles, endless uniqueness. It's cavernous and corridors. Whereas if you go to lots of parts of the U.S., the streets run north, south, east, west, and maybe they're lettered and numbered. It's like you go to A, B, C Street, and then you go up, 3 North, things like this. It's very grid-like plastic simple, I think, in a lot of ways. This notion of the world being irregular and wiggly, and the way that the literate word and the literate mind learn to see regularity. I mean, I don't know if people, sort of realize this, but one of the oddest things of the ancient world would have been something like this, a piece of paper. Paper science is very, very modern. The notion of 8.5 by 11 that is already given with square edges. This is such an anomaly in nature. I mean, paper science is a very high science. It's very modern. Vellum, animal skin, parchment. Palimpsest was one of the dominant forms of writing, which basically was a piece of parchment that had been rubbed raw and then written over it again, and maybe you could see traces of the previous writing that was on there. But paper was ultimately very, very rare. Margaret Mead tells a wonderful story about and tries to convey what the meaning of the book is. And she was talking about, I don't know if she was in Polynesia, but she was in some island, and she was there with a good number of natives, and they had never seen a book before, and they didn't really know what a book was. I mean, they'd maybe heard of a book, and then a box washed up, and it was a box of like 50 copies of the same book. And when the natives looked at it, I mean, it's the exact identicality that was registered upon them. That was the most significant characteristic of the book. I mean, when you go to nature, nature is, even the leaves on the tree, even though they're all the same, they're all maple leaves or they're all oak leaves, somehow they're irregular, they're wiggly. But a book, every book is exactly the same, and it has the same drawing on the same page numbers. And it's not just, the 8.5 by 11, but the fact that it's serial identicality, that notion, that logic of the exact same, this became a pervasive logic, which is the sort of underbelly to scientific method. Number and literacy stabilized the experience of differences amidst similarities and similarities amidst differences, and somehow doing that created a kind of regularity and an order that we now have built an entire scientific edifice upon. I mean, you couldn't have the periodic chart of the elements without some sort of numeracy and alphabetacy. I think it's hard for us to really think of how much science, independent of literacy and numeracy, is something, but it's not what we mean by modern science. I think to those people who think that humans are the most intelligent of creatures, or that even the universe is intelligent, again, it's sort of an odd expression. I think that the universe is orderly and regular. It has periodicity. It's also irregular and its endless change and variety and flux, I think intelligence may not be the best word to try to describe humans. It may be that we're the most plastic or the most subject to our own tampering. We are that animal who has invented certain kinds of technologies which have acted back upon us, and now we're separated from our natural conditions by instruments of our own making. Right, these are the lines from Kenneth Burke. Okay, thanks.